It started innocently enough. My wife, Claire, and I had been saving for years to buy our first home. We found a small, but charming house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. It felt perfect, almost too perfect. The realtor mentioned it had been on the market for a while, but that didn't seem to bother us. We saw it as an opportunity. We moved in quickly, eager to begin this new chapter of our lives. At first, the house felt peaceful, like we had found a haven to raise our daughter, Lily. But then, things began to change. Slowly at first, just enough to give us a sense of unease, and then the terror crept in like a shadow, darker and darker. It was small things at first. Items would go missing only to reappear in odd places. Claire's keys would disappear from the kitchen counter and turn up inside the refrigerator. We'd hear faint creaks in the floorboards above us when no one was upstairs. At night, I'd sometimes feel as if the air in the bedroom grew thick, like something unseen was sharing the space with us. I chalked it up to stress from the move. Claire, too, seemed on edge, but we both tried to ignore it. After all, it was an old house. Old houses make noise, right? One night, Claire woke me up in a panic. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I strained my ears. At first, there was nothing, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. And then I heard it, soft, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway outside our bedroom door. They were slow, dragging, as if something heavy was moving toward us. I bolted out of bed, heart pounding, and yanked open the door, expecting to find Lily up and wandering around. But the hallway was empty. The air was colder than usual, a chill that seeped into my bones. "There's no one there," I said, trying to sound confident, but my voice wavered. "Ben, I swear, something's not right here," she muttered, clutching the blanket tightly around her. I agreed, but what was I supposed to say? It was probably just the house settling. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Things escalated quickly after that. I started noticing glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, blurred shapes darting across rooms, too fast to fully comprehend. Once, while I was sitting at the kitchen table, I caught a flash of something speeding past the doorway, too quick to register any details. Just a blur, like a shadow running through the house. Lily started waking up at night, screaming about the fast man who wouldn't stop running in circles around her room. Claire dismissed it as bad dreams, but I wasn't so sure. There was something about the way she described it that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "He's so fast, Daddy. I can't see him, but I hear him." One evening, I was walking down the hallway when I felt a gust of wind rush past me, cold and sharp. It was like something had just sped by, inches from my face. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The hallway was empty, but the feeling of someone, being right there lingered long after the moment had passed. As disturbing as the fast ghost was, it was the slow one that began to haunt my dreams. While the fast one was an unsettling blur of movement, the slow one was deliberate, menacing in its patience. It never made itself fully visible, but I could sense it, lingering just beyond the threshold of sight, creeping through the house in an agonizingly slow manner. The first time I truly felt its presence, I was alone in the living room, reading. Claire and Lily were upstairs, and the house was eerily quiet. A shadow crossed the far wall, moving so slowly that it took me a moment to realize it wasn't just a trick of the light. It stretched from the ceiling to the floor, unnaturally tall and thin, and it crawled across the wall like a predator stalking its prey. My heart raced, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The room grew colder, the air thick with something dark and malevolent. It stopped just before reaching me, and for a second, the house was deathly silent. Then the sound came, a slow, deliberate footstep behind me. I turned, expecting to see what? I wasn't sure. But the room was empty. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt glued to the floor. The footstep came again, this time closer, louder, like something was dragging itself toward me. I could feel its presence now, heavy and oppressive, as if it was waiting for me to do something, to acknowledge it. But I didn't dare. Claire began to experience it, too. One night, as we were lying in bed, she whispered, "Ben, do you hear that?" First, I didn't, but as the minutes passed, a soft, rhythmic scraping noise filled the room, like something dragging itself across the floorboards just beyond the door. It was slow, steady, and it didn't stop. Claire squeezed my hand tightly, her breathing quickening. "It's been happening for the past week," she confessed. "Every night. It gets closer." I didn't want to believe her, but I had heard it too. We had no answers, no solutions. And the presence in the house was growing stronger, more oppressive with each passing day. The fast one would dart through rooms, always just at the edge of my vision, while the slow one would manifest its creeping dread. Footsteps in the walls, shadows moving through the hallways at night. Lily became withdrawn, refusing to sleep in her room. "The fast one keeps running," she said. "And the slow one, he watches." The night it all came to a head was the worst. It started with the usual shadows shifting, footsteps echoing through the halls. But then, things escalated. Lily screamed from her bedroom. Claire and I raced upstairs, only to find her standing in the middle of the room, her eyes wide with terror. "He's here," she whispered. Both of them. Before we could react, a cold wind swept through the room. The door slammed shut behind us, trapping us inside. The temperature plummeted, and the air became thick, suffocating. The fast one moved first, blurring through the room, a whirlwind of movement that made my head spin. I could feel it rushing past me, so fast it felt like my skin was burning from the cold. Then came the slow one. The shadow stretched across the walls, growing larger, more defined. It crept toward us, slow and deliberate, its presence filling the room with an unbearable weight. The floorboards groaned as if something heavy was crawling toward us, and with each step, my chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. I held Lily close, Claire clutching my arm, both of us paralyzed with fear. The fast one whipped around the room, never stopping, while the slow one inched closer and closer, filling the space with an unbearable dread. I don't know how long we stayed there, trapped in that room, with the fast and slow ghosts tormenting us. Time seemed to stretch on, every second an eternity. But eventually it stopped. The fast one vanished in a blur, and the slow one's presence faded into the shadows. For a moment we just stood there, gasping for air, trying to process what had just happened. The room felt unnaturally still, as though the entire house was holding its breath. I didn't trust it. Neither did Claire. "We need to go," she whispered, her voice shaky, but urgent. She was already pulling Lily toward the door. I nodded, too numb to speak. We grabbed only what we could carry, wallets, phones, and a jacket for Lily, and made our way down the stairs. The house seemed different now. Quiet, yes, but not in the way it should have been. It felt empty, not just of noise, but of life. As if whatever had been inside it before had left us a shell, hollow and waiting for something to fill it again. The walls seemed darker than I remembered, like the shadows that clung to them were thicker, more permanent. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated. For a second, I thought I heard something, movement, faint and almost imperceptible. A blur, just at the edge of my vision. I snapped my head around, scanning the hallway, but nothing was there. My heart raced. I could feel the fast one still, somewhere nearby. It was as if it was watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. "Ben, let's go," Claire hissed, tugging at my arm. I forced myself to move, even though every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out now. We rushed outside into the cold night air, the door slamming shut behind us with a force that sent shivers down my spine. We got into the car without saying a word. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, finally starting the engine. In the upstairs window, I saw something or someone, standing there, watching us leave. It was a shadow, tall and thin, its form barely visible against the darkness inside. We checked into a hotel that night just to be somewhere, anywhere, away from that house. The room was small and cramped, but it felt safer than our own home had in weeks. Lily fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted from the ordeal, but Claire and I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to close our eyes. "What do we do?" Claire finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't go back there." I didn't have an answer. Part of me wanted to pretend this was all just a bad dream, that we could go back and everything would be fine in the morning. But I knew that wasn't true. The house, it wasn't just haunted. It was alive in some twisted way, feeding off us, growing stronger with every moment we stayed. The next day, I called a priest. He agreed to meet us at the house later that afternoon. As we drove back, my stomach churned with dread. The thought of stepping foot inside that place again made my skin crawl, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if we didn't confront it, whatever was in there would follow us wherever we went. When we arrived, the house looked exactly the same as we'd left it. Ordinary, but I knew better now. The moment we stepped inside, the temperature dropped, a cold so sharp it made my teeth ache. The priest, an older man with deep lines on his face, looked uncomfortable too, though he tried to hide it. He began blessing the house, moving from room to room, murmuring prayers under his breath. For a while, it seemed like it might work. The air felt lighter, the shadows less oppressive. But then, as he reached the stairs, something changed. The air grew thick again, that familiar suffocating pressure pressing down on us. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoed from somewhere above. The priest paused, his hand trembling as he clutched the cross. "Did you hear that?" Claire whispered, clutching Lily to her side. Before I could respond, the tapping grew louder, faster. It was the fast one. I could feel it now, rushing through the walls, circling us, taunting us. The priest hurried his prayers, his voice louder now, more desperate. But it wasn't enough. Suddenly, the slow one made its presence known. The floorboards creaked behind us, and that familiar dragging sound began. The slow, deliberate movement of something massive and unseen, creeping closer and closer. The priest turned, his face pale. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. This is not something I can stop." A cold dread settled over me. If a priest couldn't stop it, what hope did we have? We ran. We didn't stop to gather our things or close the door behind us. We just fled, desperate to escape the house and the horrors inside it. But even as we reached the safety of the car, I could feel it, both of them watching us. The fast one, flitting from window to window, and the slow one, always lurking in the corners, waiting for the right moment to strike. For days after, we stayed in the hotel trying to figure out what to do. Every night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing the fast one's footsteps outside the door of the hotel room. Claire started seeing shadows in the corners of her vision, slow-moving figures that disappeared whenever she turned her head. Lily became quiet, withdrawn. She didn't talk about the fast man or the slow man anymore, but I could tell they were still on her mind. One night, she came to me, holding her stuffed bear tightly. "Daddy, "They're not just in the house anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They followed us." That was when I realized the truth. We hadn't escaped. The house, the fast one, the slow one, they were with us now no matter where we went. There was no outrunning them. They were part of us, part of our lives, and I didn't know how to stop it. All I knew was that no matter how fast I ran, the fast one would always be quicker. And no matter how far we went, the slow one would always catch up. Eventually, we had sunk every last penny we had into that house. Our savings, our hopes, our future. There was no way we could afford to leave and start over somewhere else. Selling wasn't an option either. Who would buy it once they knew the truth? Even if we wanted to, we didn't have the money for another down payment, let alone moving expenses. We were trapped, both financially and by the dark forces that had attached themselves to us. Claire and I argued about it constantly. I wanted to send her and Lily away, at least until we figured something out. My plan was to send them to my mother's house, where I knew they'd be safe. I'd stay behind and try to find a way to deal with whatever it was haunting us. I thought I could protect them, that maybe if I stayed alone, the fast and slow ones would focus on me and leave them alone. "You think I'm just going to leave you here alone with them?" she hissed, her eyes wide and frantic. "Ben, we have to face this together. I can't just sit at your mom's house, wondering if you're alive or dead." I tried to explain that it was the only way, that I couldn't risk them getting hurt. But Claire was stubborn, and deep down, I knew she was right. Whatever this was, it wasn't just my burden to bear. We had to face it together, even if every fiber of my being wanted to shield her and Lily from the horror that was slowly consuming our lives. Finally, we compromised. We took Lily to my mother's house, explaining as little as possible, just that the house needed repairs, and it wasn't safe for her to stay there for a while. My mother, thankfully, didn't ask too many questions. She just nodded and welcomed Lily with open arms, offering us a place to stay as well. But we couldn't stay. Not while the house still loomed over us, dark and silent, waiting. After dropping Lily off, we drove back to the house. Neither of us spoke on the way there, the tension between us heavy and oppressive. I could tell Claire was scared. I was too. But we both knew there was no choice. We had to find a way to deal with this once and for all. I had spent hours researching online, desperate for answers. Most of the information I found was useless. People posting about hauntings, offering vague advice like burning sage or getting the house blessed. But nothing seemed strong enough to deal with the kind of malevolent force we were up against. The fast one, the slow one. They were something else. They weren't just ghosts. They were something far worse, something tied to the house in ways I didn't understand. I thought about calling in another priest, but the first one had made it clear that whatever was in our home was beyond his ability to help. We needed something more, something stronger. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an old forum, buried deep in the dark corners of the internet, that I found a lead. There was a man, a paranormal investigator, or so he claimed, who specialized in extreme cases. People spoke about him in whispers, as though even mentioning his name brought bad luck. His methods weren't exactly legal or ethical, but he had dealt with things like this before. At that point, I was willing to try anything. "Do you really think this guy can help?" Claire asked as we sat in the car outside the house, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. 2 days later, the investigator, a man named Simon, arrived. He was older than I expected, with a rough, no-nonsense attitude. His eyes were cold and hard, like he'd seen things no one should ever have to see. He didn't waste time with pleasantries or reassurances. "You're dealing with more than just restless spirits," he said the moment he stepped inside the house. "Whatever's here isn't just haunting the place. It's feeding off of you, off your fear." His words chilled me to the bone. Claire stood next to me, her face pale but determined. Simon walked through the house slowly, his eyes scanning every corner, every darkened hallway. "There's two of them, isn't there?" he said after a while, his voice calm but filled with certainty. "One fast, one slow." "How do you know?" Claire asked, her voice shaking. "I've seen it before," he said simply. "Different forms but the same pattern. One spirit that torments with speed, the other with patience. They're like two sides of the same coin, feeding off each other. And they're tied to this house, probably something that happened here a long time ago. A violent death, maybe. Something that left a mark." He paused at the top of the stairs, where the air seemed to thicken, the temperature dropping sharply. "I can get rid of them," he said. "But it won't be easy. And it won't be cheap." "We don't have much money left," I said, my heart sinking. "You don't have a choice," Simon replied, his eyes locking with mine. "If you don't deal with them, they'll destroy you." We scraped together what little money we had left and agreed to Simon's terms. The following evening, he arrived with a bag full of strange, archaic-looking tools and ingredients. Candles, herbs, something that looked like a claw, and several jars of thick, dark liquid. "What exactly are you going to do?" Claire asked, eyeing the bizarre collection. "I'm going to break the connection between them and the house," Simon said. "It's not an exorcism exactly, more of a severance. But it's dangerous. Once I start, they'll fight back. They'll try to stop me." I didn't like the sound of that. The idea of facing those things directly, of inviting their wrath, made my skin crawl. But what choice did we have? That night, Simon began the ritual. He spread salt across the entrances to each room, lighting candles and murmuring strange words in a language I didn't recognize. Claire and I stood in the living room, watching as he moved through the house. The air grew thick with tension, like a storm was brewing just beyond the walls. And then it started. The fast one came first, rushing through the rooms with a speed that made my head spin. It was like a blur, moving so quickly it barely seemed real. The candles flickered wildly, threatening to go out as the fast one whipped past them, knocking over objects and slamming doors. I could hear its footsteps, rapid and chaotic, circling us, moving faster and faster. Then the slow one followed. That familiar dragging sound echoed through the house, growing louder, closer. I could feel it creeping toward us, its presence heavy, oppressive. The floorboards creaked under its weight, and the temperature dropped sharply, so cold I could see my breath. Simon stood in the middle of the room, completely calm, as if he had seen this 100 times before. He continued chanting, his voice growing louder, more forceful. Suddenly, the fast one slammed into the walls, shaking the entire house. The slow one's presence loomed closer, its shadow stretching across the floor. Claire grabbed my hand, her grip tight, as we stood frozen, watching Simon fight to push them back. "Hold on," he shouted over the noise. "Don't let them break your focus. They need your fear." But fear was all I had. The fast one was everywhere at once, a blur of chaos, while the slow one crept closer, like death itself approaching, one agonizing step at a time. Just when I thought we couldn't take it anymore, something changed. The air in the room shifted. Simon's voice grew louder, more insistent, and the shadows in the house began to retreat. The fast one's presence flickered, weakening, its frantic movements becoming erratic, as if Simon's ritual was tearing it apart. The slow one, too, began to fade. Its oppressive weight lifted slightly, its dragging footsteps growing fainter. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. But then, just as it seemed we were winning, the fast one let out a terrible screeching sound, a noise so high-pitched and unnatural it made my ears ring. It was angry, furious, fighting back with everything it had left. Simon shouted something in the strange language he'd been using, raising the claw-like object into the air. The shadows seemed to swirl around it, like they were being sucked into the... And then, with one final, deafening crash, it was over. The house went silent, deadly silent. Claire and I stood there, holding our breath, waiting for something. Anything. But the fast one didn't return. The slow one's heavy presence had vanished. It was like they had never been there at all. Simon lowered the claw, his face pale but triumphant. "It's done," he said, his voice hoarse. "They're gone." We didn't speak. We just stood there, stunned, trying to process the fact that after everything we were finally free. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. As we stood in the stillness of the house, too shocked to fully grasp what had just happened, Simon turned to us, his face grave. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something darker. Something that made the air in the room feel cold again, despite the ghosts being gone. "They're twins," he said, his voice low and filled with a weight that made spirits bound together by something more powerful than any ordinary haunting. "They're called the twins of opposites, one fast, one slow. Two sides of the same cursed soul. They feed off each other, off fear, chaos, pain. And they're far more dangerous than you realize." Claire's grip on my arm tightened. "But they're gone now, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might bring them back. "You said they were gone." Simon nodded slowly, but his expression remained grim. "I forced them out of this house," he said. "But spirits like them, they're persistent. This ritual broke their connection to this place, but it didn't destroy them. It's never that simple with something as old and powerful as they are." A cold dread settled over me. "So, what are you saying?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "Are we still in danger?" Simon's gaze was hard, unflinching. "Not from them directly, not here. The house is free of them, but you," he paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "You were their focus for too long. They're not done with you. They'll look for another way, another opening. Maybe not today, maybe not even this year. But they will come back. They always do." Claire's face went pale, and I felt my heart drop. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We can't keep living like this, waiting for them to come back." Simon didn't answer right away. He pulled a small pouch from his bag and handed it to me. "Inside is a protection charm," he said. "It won't stop them forever, but it'll give you time. When you feel them near, use it. You'll know when they're close." I took the pouch, my hands shaking. It felt impossibly light for something meant to hold back such malevolent forces. "How long will it last?" Simon shrugged. "Long enough for you to figure out your next move. Just remember, they feed on fear. The more you're afraid, the stronger they get. Stay calm. Stay strong. And whatever you do, don't let them in again." Simon left shortly after, disappearing into the night without another word. The house was still, almost unnervingly so, as if the very walls were trying to recover from what had just been purged from them. Claire and I sat in the living room, too exhausted to speak, too shaken to sleep. The house was quiet now, but every creak, every distant sound made me flinch, made my heart race with the fear that they hadn't really left, that they were still hiding in the shadows, waiting to strike. "We can't stay here," Claire whispered, her eyes dark with exhaustion. "Even if they're gone, I'll never feel safe here again." I nodded, feeling the same weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. The house had been our dream, our future, but now it felt like a prison, haunted by memories of the terror we had endured. But where could we go? We'd poured everything into this place, and we were still tied to it, financially and emotionally. "We'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound stronger than I felt. Maybe we sell it even if it means losing money. We'll find a way. I'll pick up more hours, whatever it takes. But even as I said it, I knew that it wouldn't be that simple. Over the next few weeks, we began the slow process of putting our lives back together. We brought Lily back from my mother's house, explaining only that the house repairs had been dealt with. She seemed calmer now, no longer mentioning the fast or slow man, and for that I was grateful. But every night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but think about Simon's words. They'll come back. They always do. And the worst part? I believed him. Even though the house was quiet now, even though the fast and slow ghosts were gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere out there, in the dark corners of the world, they were waiting for the right moment to return. Until then, we could only wait.